Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey of rebuilding your life? Look no further than the Rebuild podcast. Join us as we dive deep into conversations that nurture personal and spiritual growth. Through the wisdom of the Word of God and practical applications, we'll guide you towards becoming the best version of yourself. On this podcast, we will delve into a variety of topics and insights, ranging from mental and emotional well-being to personal development and spiritual growth. Together, we'll explore the paths to healing, resilience, and the restoration of inner peace. Subscribe now and let's rebuild our lives together, one uplifting conversation at a time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rebuild podcast. I'm your host, Sean Romey, and today I'd like to talk about nurturing spiritual values in our kids. The reason I want to talk about this particular subject, I think this is a very important subject for all of us when it comes to, teaching our kids. I know a lot of us, especially, for those that say grew up in the church, if you're anything like me, and, not to come off as disrespectful or not to come off as, completely, illiterate in the ways of God, but not really having a real understanding of God's will and purpose, more so just taking it as, a means of going through the motions, or, just doing this because it's part of the routine, or, understanding from a very, very basic, if you will, place that, you believe in God, you go to church, you go to heaven kind of aspect, and teaching the kids the proper way to live their lives accordingly, giving them true value, giving them true insight and understanding of how to follow God's principles, how to follow God's ways, understanding what is required of us. Right, I think we need to teach that and really put into the working, the ability to ground our children in God's culture, if you will. So I want to break this down into a couple of discussion points, talk about a couple of things here regarding this, and being able to empower our children's journeys, right? Because once we understand the power of the foundation, if you will, everything else can essentially fall into place as it's supposed to. And in all reality, getting to the dynamic of what our responsibility is, right? I know a lot of us get so excited about the idea of the children are supposed to just listen to us and do what we say to do, but without the proper understanding of why, or even us understanding our responsibility in the matter, we can fall victim to, essentially just leaving our children in a position to make the same mistakes we make. And I know as parents, we don't want to do that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this thing. So as we talked about, we're going to start with, building a foundation of faith in the home. First discussion point I want to talk about in regard to this is instilling a lifelong love of faith in our children. I think this is very, very crucial, not just for the children, realistically, but for all of us. But I think for children, we have to learn how to walk them through the process, right? Teach them the values appropriately, and really be as transparent as possible with them with regard to understanding why loving God is important, right? Just utilizing the phrase or the saying that you believe in God, you go to heaven. It's nice, but without the why to make it stick, right? It's going to be difficult for us as children to be able to understand how to navigate in that process, right? And as a matter of fact, you talk about Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way that should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. We understand training them up, right? A lot of us, again, we love the phraseology as Ephesians 6:1 talks about children, obey your parents, for it's the first command with promise. And we love getting into Exodus chapter 20, where it talks about honoring your mother and father, for days will be added unto your lives. And while we do push those two verses, and we allow we allow our control factor, if you will, to reference those two verses, we fail to see that we have a responsibility to instill it properly, if you will. Right? I can tell my children to go to church all day long. And yeah, we know to go to church because that's, something to do, quote unquote. But how many times do we allow them to understand why we go to church? Right? Other than just saying, oh, well, you go to church so you can go to heaven. Well, no, we go to church to learn about God's will and purpose. And just like going to school, right? You learn principles of God's will and purpose. You're learning how to carry yourself. That's why we have the Bible, right? Think of it like taking homework, going to study. Have those times. And then taking outside of that, being able to have time outside of the normal times you meet at church. I love my mother very dearly. My mother was a preacher's kid. So I understand to an extent the sentiment my mom had in regard to, treating Sunday as, a special day, and even so far as to, she's going for her. And the expectation, for us to sit down and pay attention and understand what's going on, yeah, we had to live under that. But it also came at a cost because we really didn't understand outside of just being told, this is what you're supposed to do. And it did make it a lot more difficult for us to understand. So, we in a lot of senses, we bumped our heads a lot. One of the things that I've been in arguments and fights about regarding this, right, is, the fact that I might come across as doing a little bit too much, right? But the way that I've learned over the years with regard to teaching and cultivating a culture, if you will, of people who have a deeper understanding of what's going on, the more you understand, the easier it is for you to be able to flourish and do as you're supposed to. Right? And it's hard to do if I'm supposed to trust you at your word, but you're not giving me any substance to live off of. right? So, again, we have to understand that part, right? And starting with the children early, making faith a very engaging thing is also very important, right? One of the things that I come to find very difficult behind, tending to the youth in a lot of cases is, a lot of those that are in leadership tend to pass on older customs and traditions as the only way. I'll admit, a lot of the churches that I went to, there wasn't a lot of diversity, let alone a lot of membership. But in that aspect, you're talking about a lot of disparity in terms of being able to connect with the children, the youth. So you're stuck in an environment where you're being taught lessons of yesteryear. And I've kind of talked about this a few times in some sermons I've given, where those sermons, the sermons of yesteryear, they were fine for the time of yesteryear, right? Just to think about where we are as a people, right? We aren't in some of the same spaces that we were in 50, 60 years ago. Some aspects, yes, are still the same. And in principle, yes, a lot of stuff is still the same. But time-wise, we're not in the same time period. We're not having to go through a lot of the same literal struggles. Right? So we can't teach from that old place, that old pattern of thinking, because it doesn't apply in today's day and age. The word does, but the principles we're using to justify it don't. Right? Do you think about where we are today? Do you think about technology, for example? When you see us, we have our phones are utilized as MP3 players and banks and ATM cards and all kinds of other, like, our phones now are everything. So just imagine, in the next generation or two, the technology is not going to be the same. So speaking on, this technology of, shared data and all, it's going to be foreign to those in that position. Just as much as, like, I'm a big music buff. When, I think about when we would take and make and burn CDs and tapes. I remember going from the tape area to the CDs, and that was a big deal. And around the time that CDs were, becoming more of the norm, the MP3 players started coming out. And then as the MP3 players evolved and advanced and got better, the phone started to evolve and started to take that concept and put it into their phones. So now your phone is an all-in-one device. The same is to be said with the way that we teach the word. And how can we engage with the young folk if we're still teaching from the mindset of 1947? And no disrespect to the time period of 1947, but the mindset or the lessons that we're trying to portray, the attitudes, right, the struggle, the mindset. We're not there. That's almost 80 years behind us. And we can't teach on principles 80 years behind us, or we can't teach from a time of 80 years behind us. Right? We have to think of the now and in the future. We can reference old, but we can't live in old. And that's the difference, right? In being able to engage with the younger folks, right? We have to be able to reach out and connect and bridge that gap just as much as we expect them to reach back and try to connect to where we came from. And I think that's another one of the things that hurts us, right? We talk about training up a child in the way that he should go. And yes, we should train from what we know and understand, but we should also allow ourselves to be well-rounded enough to engage and connect, right? We want to make sure that we're allowing for study in such a way that it's appropriate, right? I can't, and think of it as we would, taking care of a child in a natural sense, right? If I'm not going to give a 5-month-old a T-bone steak, why would I give my 5-month-old child a T-bone steak? First and foremost, they haven't started teething yet. And even if they had started teething, their bodies aren't developed enough to process that type of meat, right? So I'm doing them a disservice by giving them something they can't handle. And unfortunately for us in the church, the way that we teach in those principles, in a lot of cases, that's what we're doing to our children. We're putting them in a position to where they're forced to learn from receiving meat, and they're not able to process it. And if we're not allowing them the ability to grow and cultivate that, it's going to be difficult for them to move forward in that place. A lot of them will become bored. A lot of them will be turned off. A lot of them will disengage because it's not connecting to them. And again, one of the biggest problems that we see and will continue to see as we move forward is going to come from that aspect. I remember, 25, 30 years ago, being in the church and being looked at a certain way. When I was younger, yeah, I was looked at as, okay, you're just a little boy. Cool. But as I got into those teenage years, right, and my physical appearance was different. I started to grow facial hair. I started to have, I had an afro. My physical, the clothing I wore was more appealing to the era of the youth, right? So baggy clothes, large t-shirts, et cetera, to the untrained, if you will, I look like a thug. And so the approach would be as such. So you're coming to me and trying to school me on how to be presentable as a gentleman, as if I don't have, as if I don't know how to be a gentleman. You're automatically assuming that, I'm out here trying to sell drugs, or I'm outside trying to, be a whoremonger. I'm trying to, take advantage of the girls, and I'm trying to play that game, just based on appearance. And again, that can also create a lot of disengagement. We don't want to do that. Speaking of, going right into the next point, we want to create an environment that fosters spiritual growth, right? And Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7 say, "All these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." We're not opening the door for the children to be judged because of the way they look, because of perception, right? You think of Jesus when he dealt with the people that he dealt with. He dealt with the people who were considered sinners. He dealt with the people that were considered, broken and dirty, and, the rejects, and those that weren't, that didn't fit the mold. Which, for the Pharisees and Sadducees, that kind of threw them off. Like, why would you be connected to, or why would you want to talk to these people? They're not the righteous, right? And Jesus says, I come for them because, like a doctor, I have to tend to those that are sick. I'm not coming for the purpose of trying to ridicule and reject and push away everybody because they haven't followed me. I'm giving them an opportunity to do so. And we as the church, we have to do the same thing. And we in our families have to do the same, right? We want our children to feel comfortable in understanding God's principle. And the only way that we can do that is we create that environment. We make it acceptable for them to study God's word. We find ways to connect to them, no different than we would anything else. Right? We want to have moments and times where we can pray, moments and times of studying, moments and times of reading. It's necessary, right? Because without that, then again, our children can become disengaged, right? It's easy for us as adults to disengage in a lot of cases, and a lot of us will utilize, that foundation or the lack thereof. I didn't grow up in the church, or, this wasn't my thing, or even the perception of the matter, right? When you get into the body and you get into the church, you got to live a certain kind of way, and you got to be all brutish and stuck up and blah, 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 blah. You don't have to be that, right? We want to make sure that as we're teaching these principles, right, the faith, the love, the charity, the servitude, we're offering examples to go along with that. And again, we have to allow for everyone an opportunity to see and understand how this plays out, right? And it can't be, in all reality, it can't be a one-size-fits-all kind of approach, right? If you have teenagers, learn, showcase and be able to connect to them at that stage of life. You have young children, same thing. And this is another one of those things that I used to be bothered by when I was younger, and, in the body, was, having to go to, say, a children's church service at, 15, 16 years old, and I'm in a group where at 15 and 16 years old, I really don't need to be in this group. I should be with, if you're really having to break this down, I really should be more with the adults at that point than with the children, because now I'm sitting in this children's church and I'm having to watch VeggieTales. And no disrespect to VeggieTales, but when you take into consideration, that's more so geared towards your young, preteen, even pre-preteen, your prepubescent, your 10 and younger type crowd. It's kind of difficult to, keep their interest, if you will, right? And we can't do that either, right? And we wonder, a lot of us wonder why we have such a gap in those places, and a lot of it does come from our inability to really invest in that environment, right? The same way in the home, right? Sometimes we do that too in the home. And like I said, I remember, even in the home, sometimes just because we weren't considered adults, we would have to cater to the attitude or the mentality of still being looked at as children, even though we were older, and our conversation should have been geared more towards that, although in some cases it wasn't. And it does, it makes life, it can make life difficult, right? We don't want to do that, right? So when you go back and reference Deuteronomy 6 and 7, when we're teaching these principles, we want to be diligent, right? But in being diligent, we have to utilize the proper wisdom in order to teach them accordingly, right? You should talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise, and you're allowing this thing to be a norm. But again, allowing it to connect with your children at the appropriate position in life that they're in. And you don't want to teach a 5-year-old about principles of the birds and the bees. It might go over their head, right? And just as much as you don't want to teach that, you don't want to teach your 16-year-old about the very basics of the alphabet, right? It doesn't, you're disconnected, right? And the same thing goes with connecting to the children in that regard. I know I've kind of beat the dead horse on that one for a while, and you kind of got to bear with me on that. But we do want to make sure, again, that we're practicing that and give room for the children to be transparent in that regard. And I think that's another thing that hurts too, right? Is sometimes we don't allow for them to be confident in what they do, right? Sometimes we judge them based on the way that they might do certain things. Oh, you shouldn't be praying like that. I've never really been in a position to pray in this capacity, so help me with that, right? Or the assumption is, well, you're in the church, so you should know how to pray. Can't do that either, right? Because we don't want to teach people how to mock or emulate what they don't understand. Right? And the worst thing to do is emulate without proper understanding. And I remember doing that when I was younger. My mom she would actually get on her knees and pray at night before she would go to sleep. And so I would listen to her. She would kind of pray in a whisper kind of tone. My grandmother would do the same. And so I never understood what they were doing or what they were saying, but I would just emulate it because they told us we had to pray before we go to bed. And so I'm just whispering the cup because I thought I heard them say something about a cup, and like I don't know what I'm saying, so I'm just saying whatever. And again, that can lead to a lot of misunderstanding, right? Or it can lead to a lot of assumptions. Oh, well, you know how to pray because I've seen you do it. Yeah, but if I don't know what I'm praying for, or if I don't know how to pray, I'm gonna be stuck, if you will. So we don't want to do that, right? Teach them appropriately. Incorporate, that prayer appropriately. Incorporate what to say and how to say it. Teach them about Matthew 6, 9 through 13, right? How that template applies, right? Being able to break down what each section means, right? Understanding the importance of having, when it does come to praying, that it being a conversation between you and God. Understanding, one of the things that really freed me with regard to praying, and I learned this almost 30 years ago, is you don't have to do it doesn't have to be this cultish, ritualistic type thing where you have to get on hands and knees. Um, because you can pray, while you're laying down, or you might not be in a situation where you can get on hands and knees. I've said lots of prayers, during my time. Standing watch. I'd say prayers in the car while I'm driving somewhere. I might say a prayer in the middle of a game. I do have, from a highlight tape, I have, you can't see it because it's not there, but one of my highlight plays, I went up for a block, and in real time, I remember closing my eyes and praying to God and saying, "God help me." And I ended up getting a block as a result. But you're talking about, again, it not having to be this traditional, ritualistic almost kind of things where, I got to get down on my hands and knees, and I got to do the symbol of the cross like the Catholics do, and I have to Soli Deo Gloria and all these other. I don't have to chant any of these quotes and phrases and Bible verses and sayings and all of that stuff. No, I can keep it real simple, But those types of things are important too, right? Teaching and allowing the children to understand that, right? Because building that principle too also allows, again, for them to be connected in that regard. It allows them to be, it allows them to see and understand the bigger picture of things, if you will. It'll become second nature to them, and they don't have to learn, once they become adults, how to do things that they could have learned in their childhood. And that comes back to, again, going back to Exodus, 20, where we're getting into the Ten Commandments, right? When you talk about honor your father and your mother for add days into your life, when you're being honorable and understanding the concept of adding days to your life, could it be a literal? Yes, but it could also be allowing them to not have to, make the same mistakes that you made, right? When you think about the wolves in the snow, the leaders of the pack are usually the ones that are making the pathway for the wolves behind them. The ones that might not be able to make the trek, or the ones that might struggle, right? So they're making the pathway easy for the rest of the pack, so that everyone else can make it. They don't have to work as hard. It's the same concept. If I understand, with regard to, say, just as an example, if I understand the dynamic of, why, escaping, utilizing alcohol is a bad thing, I should explain that. So then when my children get older, they're not, when they are frustrated and they are upset, or they feel as if they need to escape, they're not going to rely on the bottle like I may have. Right? Those things, right, are important when we're incorporating those types of, conversations in the faith, just as much as we do incorporating prayer and other lessons. Right? We have to showcase and be honorable. Right? We can't just leave them out in the open and expect that they know and understand just because they are, under our roof. Right? We don't want to do that. As a matter of fact, when we talk about modeling godly character and moral values for the kids, Ephesians 5:1 says, Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children. So if we're imitating God, or if we're aligning ourselves in that regard to being principled as God is, again, we have to know the why. Right? We have to be open-minded, and with children, children do ask lots and lots of questions, but they do so because they're trying to gain an understanding. And we can't take that away from them. It's imperative for them to know and to understand the whys and the hows. And we should give it to them. We should be transparent enough to give it to them. We shouldn't push them away, and we shouldn't, down talk them and, oh, well, you're just a kid, you wouldn't understand. Of course they're not going to understand if we don't tell them, right? But tell them anyway. Share it with them. Yeah, maybe they might not grasp it right away, but instill it in them still. And maybe they might come back and ask again. Okay, and that's perfectly fine. Maybe they don't. Maybe they do grab it the first time. And that's okay too. Right? But we have to be that example. Right? We in fact, when we're talking about, living out our faith, we want to be that example. Right? And this is one of those that I hear a lot of, and I see a lot of the opposite. And this was a tactic that I used to hear even during my time in the military, and that's the phrase, to do as I say and not as I do. And I used to hate hearing that phrase, because it's what it does is it creates the expectation that you're just going to follow me, but you're only going to follow me by the direction I give, not by the example that I set. And the problem with that is we're going to follow the example that you set. Right? So if your words don't line up with your actions, it's going to be that much more difficult for me to trust what you're saying. Right? Like I said, I used to hear this, especially in the military. And for a lot of, us as junior sailors, when we would hear that, we would talk about how much we would respect the rank, but not necessarily the person, because what you're saying and what you're doing, again, don't line up. And when we are following God's principles and God's words, as God sees fit for us to do so, we have to make sure that our actions are lining up with the principles. Right? And that also means that we have to know what those things mean. Right? And I think even from that standpoint too, that also hurts us. Right? And how can we be the example or living out the faith appropriately if we don't understand what it means? Right? Sometimes we do. We can be misleading if you know what I mean by that. But we want to make sure that we lead by example. Right? If we're teaching our children to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, treating others as we would want to be treated, then we want we want our children to see us showing that compassion to a person that seemingly doesn't deserve it. Right? Like I said, I see it in real time. I've seen it in social media where we teach it or we say it, but the reality is we don't necessarily we don't live it accordingly, so the children see otherwise. Right? And I know for a lot of us, we kind of wonder and question why the youth are the way they are, and the reality is our words and our actions aren't lining up appropriately. Right? So We want to make sure that we're leading by the example that we're trying to teach and set. And I know that that's seemingly very commonplace, right? That makes total sense. But in all reality, for a lot of us, we have been taught how to teach those things or how to speak those things, but we've never really been taught how to apply those things. So it does make it kind of weird. It does make it kind of difficult to, be the example that we're supposed to set. But when we do, we're able to open the door to empower the children. In fact, speaking of empowering the children, we want them to build a personal relationship with God. Right? John 17:3 says this, "And this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." And when we're talking about developing a personal relationship with God, again, we want our children to be understanding of who God is, why he sent Jesus, why Jesus is the example, why we call God our Father, why we call him King, why we have other names for him, what his purpose is for us in living here on this earth, right? And what we're supposed to do for self, what we're supposed to do for others, how to build the home, how to build the community, how to assemble as the body of Christ coming together, right? All of those things are very important, right? And being able to connect with him appropriately, right? Utilizing prayer, obviously. Being able to study the word, right? And we're using time and we're taking time out to do those things, right? To instill them too, right? We can't just, and this isn't just from this standpoint. This isn't just for us to teach the children, but this is for us to do as well, right? If the only time we crack open the Bible is when we're at service on Sunday, or when we're at Bible studies on Thursdays and Wednesdays and Fridays, or whatever other services we have, then we're doing ourselves a disservice, right? And we don't want to do that, right? We want to create opportunities for our children to experience God's presence, and knowing that we can experience God's presence anywhere, we want to allow for the children to have that spiritual sensitivity. The only way that you can really gain a sense of spiritual sensitivity in all reality is allowing ourselves to be transparent, honest, to share, to be vulnerable, right? To understand God's principle, God's word. And the only way we can do that is to spend that time with him. Right? So we should allow for our children to have that, that quiet time. Teach them what the quiet time is. Right? Sometimes we become disconnected from that because we're so accustomed to, we need to have noise. Some of us can't function without TV being on, right? Some of us can't sleep. Some of us, even when it comes to just being in the presence of quiet, we start to lose it. Like, oh my gosh, why is it so quiet? This is unusual. This is crazy. This is, I need something. Even sometimes just regular, everyday, ordinary things. Right? Some of us can't, we find it difficult to, go eat, or say go to a movie, or, go to an event alone, and just in that, right, it can be difficult for us to know what it is to have that quiet time, or that reflection time, or, to be in a position of, meditation, if you will, which is interesting because, we have to learn that too, right? Allowing our children to have moments where we go, we can go on peaceful nature walks, or, going to, just going to the park, just sitting out and enjoying the ambiance, or, maybe sitting, if you're near a beach, you go to the beach and sit and enjoy the waves, or maybe, maybe if you live by a lake, just going to the lake and listening to the soothing sounds of, the lake, whatever the case may be, right? Allowing for that. And again, it instills in them the ability to seek God out for themselves, to separate themselves. Because when we talk about going into Matthew 6 again, God or Jesus tells us, it's imperative for us to go and have that alone time. And how can one have that alone time if we're so busy and so wrapped up in trying to be, we're trying to be connected to other people, or we can't do it alone, or, we have to be seen, or we have to be heard. It's kind of difficult to do that, right? And in that, it's also going to be difficult for us to be connected to God, or to have that relationship appropriately, because we're not going to be able to see and hear clearly as we should, right? In fact, now that we're here, let's talk about, there's a lot of challenges in, raising our children. We have so many competing influences, and they're going to become even more difficult as we get older. I think about, during my time, when I was a youth, my mom's big thing with us was, television and video games. You guys, you're spending too much time, television and video games. You guys should be writing and reading and this and that. And, funny thing was I used to read a lot. That kind of changed because I started playing basketball, but I still do have a passion to read. I do write. I do also do other things too, but it was just funny that she would say that, but over the years, that thing that she had, she made a fuss about because it was, it's considered a distraction. It slowly but surely became, in a sense, in a lot of senses, a necessity because of the way that I started to develop, if you will. I became more of a homebody, so I needed that in order to be at peace, especially if I had things going on. But in today's day and age, we have we have for the youth, there are tablets, there's social media now. We see what social media is doing, right? Because social media is everywhere. There's so many extra platforms. Like when I was younger, we had AOL and Yahoo Messenger. They had just come out with Facebook, and MySpace was a thing. Black Planet was another one of those things, but they were in their younger stages at that point. And there were other websites like it. But then as you start to evolve and grow, the stronger ones or the bigger ones, or the more popular ones start to stick out, and they're longer, they live longer, they're able to evolve, they're able to grow, they're able to withstand the test of time, if you will. And now you see the platforms are starting to they're starting to evolve and grow in such a way that people aren't really on those platforms anymore. No one's really on Facebook to the same extent as they were 20 years ago. Right? There's TikTok, which we see what's going on with that. There's Instagram, and now you have your other messaging platforms, such as like Telegram and all these other things. And yeah, that distraction's still there, right? We still have TV. TV is always going to be that distraction, right? Because we have our TV shows, and we're getting to a point now where we're learning and getting more and understanding more from the TV than we are from actual life experience. That's kind of scary. We see in today's day and age too, where we have a lot of people watching other people, right? That was one of those things that kind of surprised me. My oldest daughter, actually, when she was really, really young, she would watch videos of people playing with some of the toys that she would have, and that would be the thing, to just watch them play with the toys. But that's starting again. That was becoming the norm. Like, you have guys watching other guys playing video games. You have guys reacting to people doing things, or reacting to videos that are being, that had already been made. And there's a lot of extra things going on, and we can find that a lot of our youth, find a lot more interesting things going on, and they might not feel as if their life is adequate enough, so they have to watch someone else's. The music, we know what music does. Music is music, and as music has evolved and grown over the years, we see what that does. So you have that. You have the different expectations, societal expectations, right? I know a lot of children that get involved. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who has a son that is currently playing Division I football right now, and I remember her talking about, I remember her talking about her son, being involved in just about every sport there was, because her goal was to get him into, to get him to have a scholarship. But it wasn't just that; it was, he was basketball this time and football at this time, and he's doing this sport here and that sport there, and he was always traveling. He was always gone and busy. It worked out in his benefit, of course, but even still, just knowing that you had to put in that kind of work, or you're having that kind of an effort. I've seen in different camps and different different avenues of development with AAU and youth sports, where these kids have to put a lot of time into their craft, right? They don't have time, right? So that goes back again to what they use for escapism, which can be social media. Sometimes, like I said, they might not be able to play the video game, so they'll watch someone play the video game. They might be in a position where, because they're involved in this sport and that sport, they don't have time for these things and those things. They're going to take on whatever they can. You have, you might have families that are, in other situations. You might have, we have the political aspect going on, and we see what that looks like, and there's so much more. And, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, there's only going to be more mounting as we carry on, in the foreseeable future with generations. That, there's going to be a lot of conflicting aspects or elements in trying to teach proper, protocol for the children on how to be young men and young women in the body of Christ. Right? We also have, social. We have social issues that we have to deal with. Right? We're looking at, pronouns. Those are, how do you navigate that? Being young men and young women in the body. How to identify yourself, what you identify yourself as. We have, so many other things along that line. And again, we have to know how to address those, right? We have to know how to teach those lessons to our children, right? How to address, being loving, nurturing, inoffensive, and so many other things, so that they don't walk out and do something or say something that can, cause problems, right? Equipping them with the ability to navigate challenges, right? Being able to have open communication. That's imperative, right? For not just the child, but for us as parents, right? We want to ensure that when our children have issues or problems, we can go to them and talk to them about those issues and problems. And we want them to come to us with those issues and problems, right? One of the things that, I've learned in, my struggle as, a young adult, as a kind of more middle-aged adult, as a parent, as as an adult child, as throughout all of those dynamics, is when the door for communication is not open appropriately, it really does become very difficult to really be as open and transparent as we would expect when it comes to that element of open communication, right? We want, if you're denying your child because they're young, you're disregarding their feelings or their concerns or their worries or their doubts or their fears or whatever, because it's not on your level. Don't be surprised when they age, that they're not going to come to you with those problems. Great example for me was, when I was younger, I didn't really have my father around. And so as I got older, my father would try to, he would try to connect with me in that regard. And, some of the ways that he would talk, it's like, yeah, I'm giving you an opportunity to come to me and share with me and connect with me and let me be the wise man and give you the insight and that's cool. That's cool, Pop, but I really don't need insight from you, man, because, you haven't really been there for me. And it's nothing against you, but the way that you're approaching me more so as if I'm, one third of my age than, how old I really am. And that again, it's the same thing, right? If I'm not connected with you appropriately, it's going to push, you're going to push the child away, and that communication won't be open, right? We want to be able to discuss, critical thinking. How do we navigate some of these challenges, right? Imagine in today's day and age, having to, again, navigate where we are with the pronouns and the different types of identities with sexuality, right? You have the LGBTQIA plus community, right? So you have to have to know how to navigate through that process so you don't come across as offensive, right? You're having to navigate in a world where people are quick to report and make themselves out to be victims in today's day and age. Having to navigate, when you disagree, where you're being, you're going to be put on the spotlight because you don't agree with whatever it is I have to say. And so many other things like that. And so, yeah, we have to be able to share with our children how to communicate in that regard, because it's necessary. Again, very necessary, right? We want them to be able to thrive. We want them to utilize wisdom, utilize godly principles, right? And I don't mean to utilize the word godly principles in a cliche fashion, right? But we want them to, take into account what God's will and God's word says, right? Again, when we talk about loving our neighbors as we love ourselves, we want to ensure that we know what it is to love self first, right? When we talk about being quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger, right? These are reflections of how God carries himself. You think about the kind of power God carries, right? When there's something going on that he could react the way that, we kind of react sometimes. Imagine him reacting that way and now he can't take back what he did. Yeah, it'd be kind of painful, right? Imagine. So we want to, teach principles like that. Be slow to speak and slow to wrath. Listen with your heart and not necessarily with the two ears, so you can make a rebuttal. Be able to, connect with the person and understand that person, where they're coming from, right? When we do find ourselves in this position where we're teaching well-roundedness, not just from a physical place, but from a spiritual place, we're allowing our children to be vibrant and world changers. Because at the end of the day, God's will and purpose is for us to have dominion over the earth. And in order for us to have dominion over the earth, that means we have to take back control over what we've lost. Right? We're having to rectify what's been passed down from generation to generation. Right? And the best way to do that is to equip our children so that they have more time to be able to get things back in order. Okay? When we embrace the importance of raising our children through that faith, we're opening the door for them to be able to pave a way for the next generation to build off of. And now we're taking more and more off of the surface, if you will. We're able to dig deeper and really make an impact, as opposed to just staying on the surface as we've been accustomed to for quite some time. And I look forward to that. I really hope that we're able to share our experiences with our children, encourage them to be the best version of themselves, being able to learn and live according to God's will and purpose, and really change the perception that the body has had for the longest time, where we've been seen as judgmental and crass and unloving and all of these other very, very harsh and negative connotations. Right? We want to embody God's will and purpose. And we want our children to do the same. Dear God, I thank you for today. I thank you for allowing us the opportunity to learn and teach about how to teach our children. Give them an opportunity to learn about God's will and purpose in terms of instilling what you have for us into our children. I pray, Father, that we're able to, incorporate connecting with the children at their age level, not just trying to make a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. I pray that we treat our children and connect to our children where they are, not trying to compare our situation to theirs, or not trying to compare our childhood to their childhood, figure out who's got it worse or anything along that line, but really allowing for our children to see and understand and gain knowledge and insight and wisdom into what you have for them to do. God, I pray that we're able to cultivate an environment and households that follow in your will, your principles. Teach us, guide us, and show us how to be that example for our children. For those of us that are, that maybe haven't been connected, I pray, Father, that there are open opportunities for us to connect to those children. I pray, Father, that even as we age and we get older, that we're able to continue instilling knowledge and wisdom and insight so that we can become exactly who you've called us to be. I pray your will be done, Father, and I love you and I thank you for everything. In your holy and heavenly name I pray. Amen. I thank you all for taking the time to come out to listen to us today. I do realize that this is a little bit shorter than normal, but that's okay. I do want all of us, as parents, as big brothers, big sisters, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers, influencers in terms of, community, whatever role you play that showcases an ability to influence those that are, around. I pray that we're able to, we're able to teach the appropriate principles so that our youth can be exactly who they're purposed to be, right? And we're able to have and take back what is rightfully ours. I love you all. I pray for your purpose. I pray you find your purpose. I pray for your peace. And I pray you find peace. And I pray that your will be done. All right, until next time, this is the Rebuild Podcast. I love you all. Peace.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. Tune in weekly as we dive into topics such as finding your calling, overcoming obstacles, building resilience, and strengthening your relationship with God. If you're ready to embark on a transformative journey of faith and personal growth, then join us on the Rebuild Podcast. Together, let's build a solid foundation that aligns with God's will and leads us to a life of purpose and fulfillment.